You're listening to The Women in the Arena. I'm your host, Paige Rene, former collegiate athlete turned leadership entrepreneur for women just like you. Each week, I'm bringing you a new person or message to help you expand and elevate into the woman you know you're meant to be. Now, let's step into the arena. Hey everybody, welcome back to the arena. Peyton said I should start saying that now, and I think it makes total sense. We are in the Women in the Arena. And so welcome back. This is going to be a solo podcast. Obviously, I don't have anybody I'm interviewing today, but it's going to be a part 1 of part 2 series. And I'm going to be talking to you guys about the 20 high achieving woman commandments. And that's part of my 6-step Elevate framework. And it is part of my coaching. These are all things that are just so important to me and my growth and important to my clients and their growth. And just really, really good reminders that we all need, including myself. Behind my computer screen, I have sticky notes on sticky notes, wedding stuff, like wedding planning. I have all kinds of stuff on the Elevate framework and Enneagram workshops and just all the things. And so I just think it's a really helpful reminder to have those visuals. And so because there's 20 high achieving women commandments, we're going to start with 10 in this episode. And today is actually National Women in Sport Day. And by the time you're listening to this, it's going to be a week later. But one of the things that I find so important about that is I think I can owe sport to just about everything in terms of the framework I teach, in terms of how I work with my clients, how I manage myself in navigating this business. And it actually brings me to a couple points. I put it on my Instagram story today, but I think the thing that's so vital about sport is it teaches you about teamwork. You don't love all of your teammates and you don't even get along with all of them, but you can respect each other enough to go towards a common goal. So teamwork was a huge thing. And then also failure, knowing that it doesn't mean anything about you and the quicker you can move through failure, acknowledging that it's a speed bump versus a roadblock. That's been extremely vital, and I'm in year 2 or like in the beginning of year 2 full-time business. And I have to admit, it feels harder than year 1. And the other night, Peyton's like, well, you're making a lot more money than you did in year 1 at this time. And I'm thinking to myself, yeah, that's true. And it's still harder, because then you just raise the expectation. And so my goal and my kind of affirmation or word for the year, which side note, I didn't have one. I wasn't setting out into 2024 with a word of the year. It's not something that I typically practice, but one of my friends and former clients asked me what it was, and she gifted me this really cute resin tray. And so I said, I just want this year to be relentlessly consistent. And Lord knows that has been tested already, and we're only in February. But by that, I just mean knowing that you can't ride the emotional highs and lows. So if you're listening to this and you're in business, or you're navigating a relationship, or you're in sport, or you're working through a transition, there's so many unknowns. And those of us that like to have a clear plan have to release the exact direction of that plan, because there's just too many unknowns. And so if we can stay relentlessly consistent to the things that ground us, the things that we know make us feel good, the things that keep us moving forward, it keeps us off of that emotional roller coaster of the highs and lows, right? And so if I'm speaking to myself, I'm talking about December was the biggest month in business by far, and I'm so thankful for that. And then January comes around and I'm like, oh my gosh, I need to do this again. And it was pressure as soon as January 1st hit all over again. And so I'm being tested in what I teach all the time, and trying to find that consistency and not ride those highs and lows. And yes, I think that you should celebrate them, but you can't make them mean anything more than part of the process, just like you can't make lows mean anything more than part of the process. And so I hope somebody needed to hear that today, because I know it's always a helpful reminder when I can say these things out loud and process them for myself. So, relentlessly consistent. If you've got a word for the year or any kind of intention, I'd love to hear it. So if you're watching on YouTube, or even if you're listening on Spotify or Apple, you can find me on Instagram, Paige_Rene 15. Rene is Rene, Paige, Paige. And you can just shoot me a DM. You listen to this episode and this is your word. And I always want to know what lands with you, because also sometimes you feel like you're talking to yourself most of the time. But that's the consistency I'm talking about. You have to show up. You have to show up no matter what, no matter if people are looking or responding, because you are making an impact. And when you set out to do the work you do, hopefully you're doing it because of the positive impact you can have on somebody else. So I know that's a little bit of a riff or a tangent there, but I'm just feeling called to share that with you. And the other thing that I think is really important before we dive into these first 10 high achieving women commandments is knowing that there is a certainty in an outcome. Having the faith that there is a certainty in any outcome really takes the pressure off you. Whether you believe in God, whether you believe in the universe, whether you believe that somebody, something is leading you. I personally believe in God, and knowing that the outcome is certain, or that God's highest success, is freeing. And so I know it pops a little bit of that pressure bubble and just kind of reminds me to stay on track and stay relentlessly consistent and keep my head down, right? So going into these 10 high achieving women commandments, this is really fun for me to share, because when I started building my 6-step elevate process and that framework, that is the framework that for the past 5 or 6 years, I've been taking clients through to help you get from island A to island B. And it's essentially about collapsing the timeline. Again, before we get into it, it's really important to mention where this all comes from. So I had a little bit of an identity crisis when I first started in business, or I guess it was about 2 years in, because I was like, you know what? I've learned how to create services online and sell them online, like create, market, package, and sell things online. And I should maybe be a business coach, right? Because I can help other women do that. And I did start working with other female entrepreneurs in both the product and service-based business. And then I realized that I could give you the marketing strategy. I could give you the framework. I could give you all of the tools. But if you don't know how to use them because you're getting in your own way, then we're not really doing anything. It's going in one ear and out the other. And it's essentially putting the cart before the horse. And the horse is the most important part. That's you, right? And so that's a pretty abbreviated story to how I went from, figuring out who I was as a coach, from business to like performance and leadership. And performance and leadership just makes so much more sense, because the Elevate framework helps you collapse the timeline to getting what you want and creating results in your life, because a lot of times our heads stop us there. And so part of that is including these 10 high achieving women commandments. So I'll start with number 1, I'll get to number 10, and then next episode we'll cover the next 20. So as you're listening to this, I want to know what lands with you. Of course, if you can go back and listen, I want to know what is most impactful for you, or what's a reminder or something that you haven't thought about before. You guys, when I first started my entrepreneurial journey, I had very few examples of women in leadership positions. And sometimes when I shared what I was building with my friends or with my coworkers at the time, they just didn't really get it. Even when I wanted to create some new goals and talk about those ambitions, I didn't feel like I had a community of women to share that with, which is why I found an online community of other multi-passionate, like-minded women. If you can relate, join us in our Rise Facebook community, where you get free weekly coaching, a network of amazing women who are also in the arena, and you're the first to know about the latest offers. Women leaders rise together. See you inside our Rise Facebook community. You can find the link in the show notes. So number 1 is the safest bet is on yourself. And this one is really important in particular because you can get some external validation, you can get advice from trusted people in your network, but ultimately you've got some really powerful gifts of intuition, just those like spidey senses, I think they call it, when you're in a situation where you can feel it in your body when something's not right, and you can choose to either listen to that or ignore that. That's a whole different story. But you have to be able to bet on yourself. And you can just sit here and tell me, when's the last time you went all in on you, whether it was a promotion, whether it was a relationship, whether it was deciding that you were going to go in on a new health goal? When have you gone all in and things haven't worked out? Because I know that I can sit back and name a couple scenarios where I've gone all in and maybe didn't get the outcome that I want, but ultimately I didn't go all in. There was still like 1 foot in, 1 foot out, or there was still a little bit of that fear I was hanging on to. But I'm talking about all in, like plan A only. Tell me you didn't succeed. That is why it's helpful to remind the women, myself and the women that I work with, that the safest bet is on yourself, and that it's okay to bet on yourself, right? It's okay to go all in for you. So that's number 1. Number 2 is start with where your feet are at. This piece of advice came to me time and time again in the beginning stages of my business. And I played Division I softball, and then I worked in the athletic department for quite a number of years. And so I had a really big network of softball people, from coaches to former teammates to players when I was on staff. And that big network was where my feet were at. But initially, when I got into the coaching world, I was like, oh, I need to work with like women in business. And I do work with women in business, but I really had to remind myself that I could start with where my feet are at, because I've already developed a really big resource pool of people, and they're in my network for a reason. And I think it's also a really good reminder, when you start with where your feet are at, just kind of like looking around you and what's available to you, versus thinking that you don't have the answer, or that you need to like invest in a really expensive program or move to a different state or whatever that is. I mean, I think at one point I got on a kick and I was telling Peyton, I was like, we have to live in LA because I have to be around more business coaches. I need to change my environment. And that was really getting into like a little bit of a frantic space, but there's so many opportunities. You just have to be open to them with where you're at in your immediate network now. So that's number 2. Number 3 is muddy goals equal muddy results. And this one takes me back to times in like a relationship, for example, where if you had asked me like 5 years ago what my goal in that like romantic relationship was, I would not have addressed it. I probably wouldn't have been honest with myself or with the person that asked me, because it was muddy. Like I just knew that I didn't want to be with this person long term, yet I, really cared for them, and there was some history there. And so that's muddy. And when you have muddy goals, you get muddy results. So it stayed muddy until I got really, really clear and was willing to, going back to number 1, bet on myself and go all in on like, okay, no, do I know if I'm going to meet somebody that's a better fit? No. But am I willing to bet on myself and create those clear goals of what I want my life to look like? Yeah, I'm going to, because I know that I'm going to be met with clearer results. And so that's a really, really important one. And it goes for any area of your life. It's really hard to measure something that you don't even know for yourself. I work with entrepreneurs, and I work with athletes, and I work with women in business and all kinds of people. And one of the biggest things that I see is somebody will ask me, well, okay, I want to hire an assistant to help me. And I ask, okay, well, what do you want help with? And a lot of times they're not even sure. And so they think that somebody else is the answer, but you're always going to be the answer. You're always the answer. And you have to really get in it with your work to figure out what are those types or parts of your work that you want to outsource, or that you want somebody to help you with, right? Because they want clear expectations so that they can match what you're looking for. Muddy goals get you muddy results. Clear those up. Number 4, this is obviously from the athletic background that I have, but you are meant to play your life on offense, not defense. And when I think of playing your life on defense, if you think of defense, you're defending something against the other team, right? And in a defensive space, you're kind of taking punches and like deflecting, and you don't know what's coming at you, but you're going to do your best to defend against whatever comes at you, right? And so in life, that feels a lot like being on autopilot. Waking up, making your coffee, getting your breakfast, going to work, listening to the same radio station, talking to the same people, complaining about the same things, coming home. It's that same monotonous routine that we can kind of fall asleep to our lives. Remember what everybody was talking about being woke? I think that is a very helpful term when it comes to describing your mindset. You can be asleep to certain things that are going on in your life, or you can wake up to them and play on offense. Offense means kind of getting up and knowing what you're tackling in that day, right? Like it's setting the intention, like, okay, here's my non-negotiables that I'm getting done for the day, which I teach those in the Elevate framework. And here's the things that I can delegate for tomorrow. And it doesn't mean you're going to plan everything out. Like I'm typically not a very planny type person, but when it comes to the things that I really find important, like you bet you I'm going to get really clear offensively on how I'm going to tackle those things, right? So you're meant to play your life on offense. How can you take your power back, and how can you figure out, okay, I need to look at my planner the night before. So I set myself up for success, knowing what's coming the next day when I wake up. So I'm not just scrolling endlessly when I wake up and wondering what I should do. Or is it something where you connect with somebody on a more consistent basis, right? There's a lot of ways that you can play on offense. Even if you're somebody too, the thing I've had to get a lot better at over the past year is I count my macros. And so using MyFitnessPal, this app on my phone, I feel like I'm playing on offense and creating my plan for the day when I input that first thing in the morning or the night before. And then it's like, okay, all I have to do is really let that playbook play out. Otherwise, it's feels kind of like a chore if after breakfast I log, after lunch I log, after dinner I log, and I'm like, oh, I have so many calories and fats and carbs to get. And that's just not helpful. So it's just like playing on defense. And then, if you don't know where you're at and you're out and you're offered different food or drinks or whatever, you're willing to take it because you're just like, oh, I guess, I don't know where I'm at. So that's just another example. And then number 5 is you can have it all, but you can't do it all at once. Now, I have to credit Danielle Musselman for this one because I watched her at a Hustle and Heels event last May, and she said that about balancing being the GM of her household and also a very well-known coach's wife and having kids. It's an important reminder that yes, you can have it all, but you can't do it all at once because you're only one person and you only have so much of an energy source. And that was a good reminder because it's so freeing to know that yes, it's possible and you're still going to have to delegate. You're still going to have to ask for help. In the analogy of juggling, drop a couple balls here and there just so you can focus on what's most important, right? And then number 6 is anyone who counts you out doesn't know how to count. And I think I heard this from either an Instagram reel or TikTok, and that just really stuck with me. Anyone who counts you out, and I like to add including yourself, doesn't know how to count, meaning going back to that word of the year or I talked about, or that phrase of the year for me is relentlessly consistent. It's yeah, I may have a slower month or I may have some challenging things in business, but you bet your ass I'm going to be consistent and I'm going to stick to it. I'm going to keep going despite the emotional highs and lows like we talked about. And so you should never count yourself out. And you can't expect that from other people. You have to find that for yourself. Number 7 is there are no limits to how many times you can start again. So I think about this when I think about my athletic career. Actually, the podcast that I did last week where I got to interview CrossFit Commence's new owner of the past 8 months, Ulrika, it's there are no limits to how many times you can start again. She held this vision that she had about her CrossFit career and being an owner for 14 years. That doesn't mean that she didn't look into it or consider it and think, well, maybe it's too late or I've waited too long. There is no limit unless there's limits that you put on yourself. So you can absolutely start again whenever you want, as many times as you want. The past is not a predictor of the future unless your action doesn't change, right? So going back to there's no limits how many times you can start again. If you're sitting here telling yourself, well, you failed to stick to whatever the past 15 times you tried, so what makes you think you're going to do it this time? That's not a helpful thought because the past is not going to predict the future. And unless your action doesn't change. So you have control to change your action in the future. So just know that you can start over as many times as you want. And I also go back to that analogy or that story of like J.K. Rowling. So she's the author of the Harry Potter franchise, which I know this is like dating myself because that was like very 90s, 2000s, but that was huge, right? And it's one of the like most well-known series out of all time. And she went to 12 different publishing companies before a little tiny London publishing company decided to run with her story. So it's like that was starting again that many times. Like I just put myself in her shoes and I just think, man, after number like 2, I'm thinking, maybe this was a stupid idea. Maybe this story is really ridiculous. You know what I mean? But for her to hold that vision for like 12 different times is incredible. And I think about that in business too, when I'm like ready to throw in the towel, AKA every month at my period. I'm just like, but what if tomorrow is a crazy big day or like something wild happens, right? You just kind of have to let yourself feel that momentum build. And then number 8 is you get to break generational patterns. You get to break generational patterns. So I know for a long time, I would think my family made this amount of money, or like I've seen these kinds of relationships, or I would just look at the past and again, kind of what we were just talking about, kind of let it dictate my thoughts for what was going to happen in the future. I love this one because you get to break those generational patterns. And it's so funny. I think I've said this on here before, but I was in pre-marriage counseling with Peyton, and I remember one of the instructors said that Jesus is in your heart, but your parents are in your bones. And I was like, oh my gosh, that is so nerve-wracking to hear. But while your parents are in your bones, you're still making your own choices independent of them. And so just to know that means that you have the permission to do things your way, create your own traditions, and put up boundaries where you feel like you need boundaries to protect your space. So think about that one. Number 9 is in order to speed up, you have to slow down. And Lord knows, you guys, I've really had to lean into this one lately. Just feeling like I got started with January a little bit later because we were in Miami with Peyton's CrossFit competition. And then I had a big workshop that I was running. It just felt like I wasn't getting started on my business in the way that I wanted to jumpstart it for 2024. So then fast forward, I probably worked from like 15 days straight. And it's really cool that I have the ability to do that. And I'm really excited about that. But at the same time, you guys, I was like so fried. No duh, right? Like I teach women to like create these boundaries. But again, like I'm human myself. And so I remembered that like instead of getting so frantic, I was like, you know what? I really do have to slow down. Like I do have to take a brain break, and I do have to reconnect with the things that truly ground me before I have the energy to really move forward. And the analogy I like to think of is like pulling that arrow back in order to shoot it forward. So it's a really important one. In order to speed up, you have to slow down. I think that's mostly speaking to like what grounds yourself in prayer or meditation, reading, journaling, and I do all of the above. And then last but not least, and honestly, these are in no particular order, is number 10. It's either this or something better. That is always a really good reframe. If you have a client fall through, or if you don't get a job you applied for, or if a date didn't go your way or relationship ended, leaning into it's either this or something better is so helpful. It's just such a good affirmation, because if you truly believe that you're being guided and you're taken care of, then you know that while you can't see why you were redirected in that moment, there is a bigger picture. I mean, it always helps to like shift my perspective and look backwards and say like, okay, what didn't work out and what am I so thankful that didn't work out in order to lead me to where I'm at now. So hope you really loved those first 10 high achieving women commandments. We will bring you the next 10 on the next solo episode. So have a great week, you guys. I hope today's episode inspired you on your journey in the arena. Make sure to check out the show notes in the description for a rundown of today's show with all the important links. If you enjoyed this, please share with a friend. I know how much it means to me when my friends share podcasts. Leave us a review and let us know what landed with you over on Instagram at Paige_Rene15. As always, your best bet is on yourself.